Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm an amateur model builder. I'm building a layout in my basement called the White River Line, inspired by the Frisco Railroad in the Ozarks. In my last episode, I finalized the design for the track plan here on the peninsula. I drew it on the layout, and I added the cork roadbed. Now it's time to actually lay some track. This is going to be so far the most complicated track that I've laid out. Well, that's not really saying too much because so far all I've done is a little bit of tangent track and a curve. This has quite a few switches in it, so I expect I'll learn quite a bit. Well, let's jump into it. Before laying down the track, I've got a bit of prep work to do, starting with sanding down the cork roadbed. Most importantly, I need to ease this transition between the 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch roadbed. After that, I quickly sanded the remaining roadbed just to make sure it was smooth and even. Next, a little work over at the workbench. I've been wanting a rail bender, but couldn't bring myself to spend the $90 for the ones I've seen online. So I decided to build my own with some scrap left from building the bench work. Let's see how this works. Well, for less than $10, I've got a rail bender. It may not be as good as the $90 one, but it'll work. With that complete, I need to finish some prep on my switches. I started by airbrushing the PC boards with Israeli Sand Gray Primer. Then, I made a pretty thick wash of German black brown and applied it to all the ties. With the switches ready, I started sanding some ties I'd laid down earlier. A couple of ties got knocked loose, so I glued them back in place. I was getting ready to spike down some rail when I got a package in the mail. It was a couple more tie jigs that James from Boulder Creek Yard 3D printed for me. These jigs have slightly wider spacings than my mainline jig for branch lines and sidings. I'm using the branch line jig here, and these ties are spaced at 22 scale inches, whereas the mainline is spaced at 20 scale inches. I placed ties in the jig and used a bit of masking tape to keep them together and prep for laying them on the roadbed. I ran out of pre-cut ties, so I pulled out my Chop It from Micromark and cut up a few more. This is 3 32nd square basswood, and I chopped them 1 1/8 inch long. Now I'm completely out of ties and basswood strips, so I'll need to get a couple of bundles on order before I can get these ties laid. But I'll get started with what I have for now. Before getting the ties glued in place, I mark the placement of the ties on the end of the switches, so I'll know the proper spacing for these sections of ties. I use plain white glue to affix the ties to the roadbed. Next, I sand them lightly to even out the tops, just like before. As usual, I had to repair a few ties that came loose during sanding. You may notice that some of these ties are dyed brown, and some are not. I wasn't really happy with the color of the ties that I had dyed previously, so I didn't bother to dye the new ties I just cut. Now I'll add that wash of German black brown to all the ties. I was worried that the undyed ties might not match the dyed ties, but I think they look pretty good. Now I'm ready to lay down some rail. I pulled out my rail bender and spent some time dialing in the curve for this corner. Once I got this taken care of, I squared up the end of the rail and eased the edges to make it easier to slip on a rail joiner. I put a rail joiner on the end of the rail, pulled it off, turned it around, and then slipped it back on. This will spread the rail joiner a bit and make it easier to slip on the rail that's already on the layout. After joining the two rails together, I spiked the new rail down to the next 3 ties. Then, I went to the other end of the rail and used some T-pins to temporarily put it in place. I made a small jig out of sheet styrene to help position the rail so that both rails will be centered on the ties. I'm not counting on this jig to give me the proper gauge, but it should be accurate enough to help me position the first rail. Next, I used T-pins to position the rail approximately in the center and 1/4 and 3/4 of the way through. I'm not counting on this as a final placement, but it will help keep it in approximate position as I spike it down. I marked every 8th tie with a T-pin just to help me keep track. Then, working from one end to the other, I spiked the rail at each of these marked ties, using my jig to help me position it. I left the last few ties unspiked as I prepare to solder a bit more rail on to reach the turnout. I'm leaving a small gap here between the rail and the turnout. This will allow for some expansion due to temperature fluctuations. Then I go back to where I left off and spike the rail at every 8th tie, and again leave the last little bit loose. Then I went back to the start and filled in the work so I have a spike every 4th tie. With the first rail complete, I started on the second rail. Using a couple of 3-point track gauges, I worked from one end to the other, spiking every 4th tie. These spikes are offset from the spikes on the other rail. I double-checked myself frequently with my NMRA gauge. Once I reached the end, again leaving the last bit of rail unspiked, I removed the switch and slipped on a couple of rail joiners, and then connected it to the track I just laid down. I had to do a little filing on the rail to fine-tune the fit. I spiked the turnout on both ends just to hold it in place. Then I went back and finished spiking down the rail in front of the turnout. I added a few more holes to the pre-drilled holes in the laser cut ties for the switch. Then I spiked them down, just to give me a little more confidence that it's going to stay in place. I started to work on the first leg of the Y. However, I'm running low on spikes, so I'm not sure how far I'll get. Like before, I started by bending the rail to the approximate curve. Then I joined it to the diverging route of the switch on the main line and used T-pins to attempt to get it to the proper position. I marked, snipped, and filed the end. Then I spiked every 8th tie. It turns out I'd snipped it a bit long and had to go back and fine-tune the length. Again, I left the last bit of rail loose and worked back from the beginning so it was spiked every 4th tie. When I began work on the second rail, I did not size it before I started spiking. Like before, I spiked every 4th tie using my 3-point track gauge. As I got close to the end, I clipped and filed it and slipped the Y switch onto the rails. Then I finished spiking down both rails. I'm not going to have quite enough spikes to finish this out, so this seems like a good stopping point for now. Once I get some more spikes, I can finish this up. For my next video, I think I'm going to work on building the ladder for my yard. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave me a like. It's the easiest way to support my channel. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and you can find those links in the description below, along with a list of tools, supplies, and resources I use. There's also a link to my Amazon wish list if you'd like to support me further. Thanks for watching, and please join me again next time as I continue modeling the White River Line.